The ink on the divorce papers wasn't even dry when Mark looked at his wife of 10 years and laughed in her face. He called her worthless. He told her she was nothing but a passenger in his life, and now he was evicting her from his world. He thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything from Sarah. But Mark made one fatal calculation. He forgot that rock bottom is where the strongest foundations are built. He had no idea that the woman he was throwing away was about to be caught by the one man Mark feared most. Watch closely, because the look on Mark's face when Sarah walks back into his life isn't just regret, it's pure terror. The conference room on the 45th floor of the fictionalized Holloway & Associates law firm in downtown Manhattan was freezing, kept at a temperature meant to keep minds sharp and emotions cool. But for Sarah Miller, the cold felt like it was seeping into her very marrow. Across the mahogany table sat Mark Miller, the man she had loved since they were sophomores at NYU. He was checking his watch, a platinum Patek Philippe that cost more than Sarah's father had made in a decade. He tapped his fingers on the glass surface, impatient, radiating a distinct aura of annoyance rather than remorse. "Come on, Sarah," Mark said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's not drag this out. I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin in 45 minutes, and I really don't want to be late. The investors for the Apex Tech merger are flying in." Sarah looked down at the documents in front of her. The settlement agreement. It was a generous title for what was essentially an unconditional surrender. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to steel herself. "This leaves me with almost nothing. The house, the stocks, even the joint savings. You moved it all." Mark scoffed, leaning back in his leather chair. A smirk played on his lips, the same smirk that had once charmed her, now twisted into something cruel. Beside him, his lawyer, a shark-like man named Mr. Henderson, didn't even look up from his tablet. "Sarah, look at me," Mark commanded. When she raised her tear-filled eyes, he shook his head. "I built this empire. Me, my late nights, my stress, my genius. You planned dinner parties. You picked out curtains. You were a passenger, Sarah. A very expensive passenger. And frankly, the ride is over. I need a partner who matches my trajectory, not an anchor dragging me down." "I supported you," Sarah said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "When you were coding in our basement apartment, who paid the rent, who worked 2 shifts at the diner so you didn't have to take a corporate job. I gave up my acceptance to law school for you." Mark let out a loud, genuine laugh. It echoed off the glass walls. "Oh, please, don't rewrite history to make yourself a martyr. That was 10 years ago. You made an investment and it didn't pay out the way you wanted. That's business. Now sign the papers. I'm offering you $50,000. It's enough to get a studio apartment in Queens and start over. More than you deserve, frankly." The door to the conference room opened and a woman walked in. She was stunning tall, wearing a crimson dress that hugged every curve, and at least 10 years younger than Sarah. It was Chloe, Mark's executive assistant. "Mark, the car is downstairs," Chloe said, her voice smooth like syrup. She glanced at Sarah, her eyes flicking over Sarah's 3-year-old cardigan and tired face with undisguised pity. "Oh, are we still doing this?" "Just finishing up," Mark said, his tone instantly shifting to warmth as he looked at Chloe. He turned back to Sarah, his face hardening. "Sign it, Sarah, or I withdraw the $50,000 offer and my lawyers will bury you in litigation until you're living in a shelter. Do the smart thing for once in your life." Sarah looked at the pen. She looked at Chloe, who was already checking her reflection in the window. She looked at Mark, the man who had promised to love her until death. She realized then that the man she loved was already dead. This monster was a stranger. With a shaking hand, Sarah picked up the pen. She didn't sign it because she was weak. She signed it because she wanted to be away from the toxicity. She scribbled her name, Sarah Miller. "Excellent," Mr. Henderson said, snatching the papers away the moment the ink hit the page. Mark stood up, buttoning his bespoke Italian suit jacket. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't say goodbye. He walked over to Chloe, placing a hand on the small of her back. At the door he paused and looked back at Sarah, who was sitting alone in the vast cold room. "Do me a favor, Sarah," Mark said, a cruel glint in his eye. Change your last name back to whatever it was before. I need the Miller brand to remain untarnished by failure. He walked out, Chloe laughing at something he whispered, leaving Sarah in the silence of the 45th floor. The reality of Sarah's new life hit her not in a courtroom, but in the grocery store aisle 3 weeks later. She was standing in front of the pasta sauce, calculating the difference between the generic brand and the one she used to buy. The difference was 80 cents. She put the generic jar in her basket. The $50,000 Mark had gifted her had evaporated faster than she could have imagined. First and last month's rent on a small drafty apartment in a rougher part of the city had taken a chunk. Then there were the debts credit cards that Mark had insisted were in her name for credit building, but were maxed out with his expenses that the prenup didn't cover. By the time she settled the immediate fires, she had less than $4,000 to her name. She had applied to dozens of jobs, but a 10-year gap in her resume was a red flag that no amount of household management experience could explain away. She was 32 years old with a half-finished degree and a wardrobe that belonged to a life she could no longer afford. Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Against her better judgment, she opened it. It was a photo from the city business gala. There was Mark looking dashing in a tuxedo holding a champagne flute. On his arm was Chloe wearing a diamond necklace that Sarah recognized it was a piece Mark had bought for their 5th anniversary, claiming it was an investment. The caption read, "Power couple Mark Miller and Chloe Evans, celebrating the upcoming merger with NextCorp. The sky is the limit." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. She locked her phone and shoved it into her pocket, her eyes stinging. She paid for her groceries, pasta bread, peanut butter, and instant coffee, and walked out into the pouring rain. Her car, a 10-year-old sedan that Mark had generously allowed her to keep, wouldn't start. "No, no, no," Sarah pleaded, turning the key. The engine sputtered and died. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel and finally let the tears come. She cried for the law degree she never got. She cried for the baby they had tried to have but couldn't. She cried for the wasted decade of ironing his shirts and soothing his ego. A sharp rap on the window made her jump. She looked up to see a police officer. "Ma'am, you can't idle here. You're blocking the loading zone." "It won't start," Sarah choked out, rolling down the window. "Then you'll need a tow. I have to ticket you if you stay," the officer said, indifferent to her red eyes. Sarah nodded, defeated. She called a tow truck, which cost her another $200 she didn't have. She ended up walking the last 6 blocks to her apartment in the rain, carrying her grocery bags. One of the bags ripped halfway there, sending the jar of generic pasta sauce shattering onto the pavement. She stood there staring at the red splatter mixing with the dirty rainwater. It looked like a crime scene. "Need a hand?" a deep, gravelly voice asked from behind her. Sarah spun around, defensive. A man was standing there under a black umbrella. He looked rough. He was wearing a worn-out gray hoodie, dark jeans, and scuffed boots. A baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, obscuring most of his face, but she could see a heavy stubble and a strong jawline. He looked like a construction worker getting off a late shift, or perhaps someone who was just as down on his luck as she was. "I don't have any money," Sarah said instinctively, taking a step back. The man chuckled, a low rumbling sound. "I didn't ask for money. I asked if you needed a hand." He didn't wait for permission. He crouched down and began picking up the unbroken items, the peanut butter, the bread. He took off his hoodie, revealing a plain black t-shirt underneath, and wrapped the broken glass shards in the hoodie to clear the sidewalk. "That's your hoodie," Sarah exclaimed. "You'll ruin it." "It's just clothes," the man said. He stood up, handing her the salvaged groceries. His eyes met hers for a brief second. They were an intense, piercing blue, startlingly bright against his weathered appearance. "You look like you're having a hell of a day, miss." "You have no idea," Sarah muttered, wiping rain from her face. "Thank you, really." "I'm Sebastian," he said, extending a hand. It was rough, calloused. "Sarah," she replied, taking it. "Well, Sarah," Sebastian said, looking at the red sauce on the ground. Looks like dinner is ruined. I know a place around the corner that serves the best clam chowder in the city. Cheap, too. My treat." Sarah hesitated. Stranger danger was real. But there was something about this man, a quiet, grounded solidity that felt the opposite of Mark's frantic, superficial energy. And she was starving. "I can't let you pay," she said. "You ruined your hoodie for me." "Consider it an investment," Sebastian said with a faint smile. "I hate eating alone." Sarah didn't know it then, standing in the rain with a ruined jar of sauce and a broken heart. But she had just shaken the hand of the only man in the city who had more money than Mark Miller. She had just met Sebastian Sterling, the reclusive heir to the Sterling shipping fortune, a man who had vanished from the public eye 5 years ago. And he wasn't looking for a business partner. He was looking for something real. The clam chowder at Joe's Diner was hot, thick, and surprisingly good, but Sarah could barely taste it. She was too busy trying to keep her hands from shaking as she held the spoon. Across the chipped laminate table, Sebastian ate with a quiet, efficient hunger. He didn't stare at her, didn't push her to talk, and didn't offer empty platitudes about how everything happens for a reason. He just offered a presence, a solid anchor in the storm that had become her life. "So," Sebastian said after pushing his empty bowl away, "you have a car that won't start a husband who, if I'm reading the body language correctly, is an ex-husband and a jar of pasta sauce that met a tragic end. What's the plan for tomorrow?" Sarah laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Wake up. Don't check my bank account. Try to find a job that doesn't require a reference from the last 10 years. "What are you good at?" Sebastian asked. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with assessment. It was the look of a mechanic diagnosing an engine or a general surveying a battlefield. "I used to be good at managing a life," Sarah said, tracing the condensation on her water glass. "I managed the contractors for our renovations. I organized charity galas for Mark's company. I balanced the household budget to the penny so he could reinvest every dollar into his startup. I'm good at logistics. I'm good at making things run smoothly while staying invisible." Sebastian nodded slowly. Logistics. The invisible art. People only notice logistics when they fail. "Exactly," Sarah said, surprised he understood. Most people thought she just sat at home eating bonbons. "I might know a guy," Sebastian said casually. "Runs a high-end catering outfit, Silver Spoon Events. They handle the big corporate gigs downtown. They need people who can handle pressure and organize chaos. It's hard work, long hours on your feet, but the tips are cash." "I'll take it," Sarah said immediately. She didn't care about the prestige. She needed survival. The next 6 months were a blur of exhaustion and grit. Sarah Miller, who had once hosted dinner parties for Manhattan's elite, was now clearing their plates. She worked 60-hour weeks wearing a black vest and tie, carrying heavy trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres until her feet bled. But she survived. She moved into a tiny studio apartment in Astoria. It had a leaky faucet and the radiator clanked like a dying tank, but it was hers. And every Tuesday and Friday night Sebastian came over. He never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes it was a bag of fresh bagels. Other times a bottle of wine that tasted far too expensive for a construction worker to afford, though he claimed he got a deal from a buddy. They fell into a routine. Sebastian fixed her leaky faucet. He rewired the faulty outlet in her kitchen. He even got her car running again, claiming it just needed a new alternator and some tinkering. Sarah assumed he picked up the parts from a junkyard. She had no idea he had ordered a custom OEM part from Germany and installed it himself in the middle of the night. She fell in love with him slowly, then all at once. She loved his calloused hands, his quiet humor, and the way he listened to her talk about her day as if she were detailing a military campaign. She loved that he had nothing, no fancy suits, no sports cars, no ego. He was just a man who saw her when she felt invisible. But while Sarah was rebuilding her soul, Mark Miller was busy conquering the world. Apex Tech had gone public. Mark's face was on the cover of Forbes and